They were winning yet already losing the war. And the reason terrified German commanders. In 1944, German tank commanders believed in the unshakable superiority of their armoured forces. For years, the doctrine of blitzkrieg had dominated Europe, a combination of speed, coordination, and overwhelming firepower had crushed armies from Poland to France. German officers were trained to trust their tanks not merely as machines, but as decisive instruments of operational art. Every Tiger and Panther they deployed carried the weight of strategy itself. In their minds, quantity could be overcome by quality. One well-commanded formation could defeat dozens of inferior enemy vehicles. On paper, the Germans were invincible. Yet this confidence created a dangerous blind spot. German commanders focused on the mechanics of victory, the number of enemy tanks destroyed, the accuracy of shots fired, the efficiency of crew maneuvers. What they failed to account for was the larger, invisible enemy, a system capable of absorbing losses and continuously advancing. Each battlefield success felt real, tangible, and complete. But in the broader war, these victories were fleeting. Every destroyed Sherman, every broken American column was quickly replaced by another. The Germans had been trained to think in terms of decisive battles, but they were facing a conflict of endurance. Captain Heinrich Müller, a Panther commander in Normand, described the unsettling experience of this new reality. "We would destroy a column of Shermans," he later wrote, "and when we looked again, another was advancing. It was as if the enemy never ran out. This sense of endless opposition struck a chord of fear that no tactical calculation could counter. The Germans could not understand how an army so seemingly weaker in individual vehicles could maintain such relentless pressure, and therein lay the seed of a profound psychological shift. The realization that superiority in quality alone might no longer be enough. Even the most advanced German tanks required meticulous care. Mechanical failures were frequent, and replacements were slow. In contrast, American forces relied on simplicity, standardization, and industrial might. Shermans might be weaker in armor or firepower, but they were reliable, plentiful, and constantly on the move. For German officers, the image was horrifying. Every destroyed Sherman was like cutting a wave in the ocean it temporarily parted, but never ceased. The battlefield became a place where traditional metrics of success lost their meaning, and fear of the inevitable began to replace confidence. By the end of the Normandy campaign, the illusion of German superiority had begun to crumble. German officers realized that the war was no longer fought in the duel between tanks, but in the relentless, almost mechanical persistence of the American system. This understanding, though fine, came too late. It would be repeated across every battlefield in Western Europe. Germany's most trusted tools of war, its elite armoured divisions, were pitted against an enemy that could outlast, outproduce, and outmaneuver them on a scale no individual tank could match. The stage was set for a new kind of fear, one rooted not in firepower, but in inevitability. For years, German armoured commanders had been accustomed to fighting British tanks. From the early campaigns in France to the deserts of North Africa, British vehicles had posed a threat, but a predictable one. Early war models like the Matilda and Valentine were heavily armoured but slow, while faster cruisers like the Crusader lacked firepower. The Germans had learned the rules of engagement, where to strike, how to flank, and which weapons guaranteed success. Every British attack could be anticipated, and every defensive line had strategies designed to exploit weaknesses. Confidence was built on experience, and experience told the Germans they could contain this enemy. Yet, predictability came with its own price. British doctrine emphasized infantry support, artillery integration, and careful, measured advances rather than bold, independent armoured thrusts. Their attacks were methodical and conservative, often limited by logistical constraints and terrain difficulties. From a German perspective, this made British armour dangerous in theory but manageable in practice. Each encounter followed a pattern reconnaissance: engagement, counterattack, victory. Even setbacks were temporary, and losses could be replaced within the established framework. Commanders believed these engagements could always be controlled. In North Africa, officers such as General Irwin Rommel observed the British closely. Despite his reputation for audacity, Rommel noted that British armoured units were slow to adapt to rapidly changing situations. Crews were brave, certainly, but their tanks could be trapped, isolated, or destroyed if German commanders applied proper strategy. German memoirs frequently describe British columns as formidable yet ultimately predictable, like a puzzle the Germans had learned to solve. For every British attack, a German plan existed and confidence remained high. However, familiarity bred a subtle complacency. While German officers prepared for British manoeuvres, they could not anticipate the coming shock of American tactics. British armour was limited by doctrine, numbers, and logistics, which allowed the Germans to measure and contain its threat. In contrast, the Americans introduced variables that would render German calculations irrelevant: overwhelming numbers, industrial resilience, and a relentless operational tempo. This contrast would soon make even the most confident German commanders realized that experience was not enough, that knowledge of the enemy could not prevent the psychological pressure of facing a force that simply would not stop. By the end of this chapter, the pattern is clear. British tanks were a known, manageable enemy. They could be engaged, defeated, and their attacks absorbed. The Germans had strategies, tactics, and confidence to handle them. But this very predictability would amplify the shock when the Americans arrived. What German officers considered their manageable foe revealed the psychological and tactical comfort they were about to lose, a comfort that American forces would destroy with sheer persistence and logistics. The stage was being set for fear of something entirely different, something unstoppable in scope, if not in individual strength.